Hello, this is First Fire Non-Assault Move. Welcome back to the 54th episode in the War in the East series. Let's get a situation report. It is the second week of July. A lot has happened in this turn, which I'm very excited to show you all. Let's start with Army Group North. No change along the Leningrad sector, all the way down, we could say, to Bryansk. As far as moves and attacks go, we did extract an infantry corps out of this frontage here in and around Leningrad and further south around Novograd, and we've inserted that infantry corps into a more critical part of our front, some internal reinforcing being done. And I'll also point out that Soviets' line is thinning out. I think the Soviets are extracting some of their own forces and placing them in more critical sectors where Stavka believes they are better served. Let's travel down the front here. All nice and clean. It's certainly not a straight front by any stretch from Leningrad down to the Moscow sector. As we look down here, here's a change from last episode. We recognized again that there was no chance of encircling Ryzev with the combat power we had available. That infantry corps has been pulled out. That was actually the one that we had pulled out from Army Group North frontages. They are now elsewhere as well, as well as at least 3 other infantry divisions that were able to determine were better served elsewhere and still maintain a solid defensive line. Let's travel further south. Here is Moscow and the Moscow front. As we've kind of seen along the Leningrad frontage, the Moscow front, Soviet forces are not as thick and defending as much in depth as they were when the pressure was on them. They were fearing that we might actually reach Moscow, and they threw every formation they had available in front of the German axis of advance. Now it's slightly less defended. Soviets have had time to build up some excellent fort levels, though. We can check that out here, as well as the German forces, some excellent fort levels. We have to turn our eye towards this sector eventually, and that could be for future planning. Not too far in the future, we have unfinished business south of Moscow, which we'll talk about, and there may be continuing ops south of Moscow. However, Moscow is not off our radar. Let's travel a little further south of Moscow in the Tula sector, where we have Tula Pocket Part 2. We've cleaned this up a little bit, and the Soviets have condensed their own forces, and now we've encircled them fairly tightly, only one gap for them to escape. We had enough combat power to potentially destroy them all this turn, but we had other plans in mind, and those plans were the grand encirclement we wanted in and around Voronezh. So let's take a look at that big picture first. This is what the front is looking like. Here we have Tula Pocket Part 2, and here is the Voronezh Pocket. We were able to successfully encircle the Soviets. We'll get into the details a little bit. It wasn't as dramatic as some of our prior encirclements where some attacks were hanging on the balance, and we weren't really sure that we might encircle the Soviets at one point. And some of the encirclements in the past also, we were a little having our cheese in the wind, so to speak, leaving our forces very extended. In this case, although there was heavy fighting throughout, breaking through the initial portion of the front where we had our axis of advance to the north here and to the south here. Once we were through the Soviets' line, and unfortunately we talked about having to use our panzer divisions and our motorized divisions because our infantry just wasn't in place to take part, to have their role as breach openers. We used our panzer divisions to do that, so we consumed some combat power out of our Panzer Corps for the breakout, and we thought that might affect the overall operation, but it didn't turn out that way. It really didn't. We fairly handily broke through once we pushed the Soviets to the north and to the south, over the Voronezh River, to the north of Lipetsk, where we have a unhindered route, no Soviet zone of control threatening the hexes, where we pushed through our panzer divisions and motorized formations to link up with the southern pincer. Overall, territorial, it's one of our larger encirclements. However, I think it's only going to be slightly larger as far as number of Soviet formations encircled than we had with that 55 plus right at the end of, I think it was 1941. I'm forgetting a little bit. We had that large encirclement. Where was that one? I think it was right in here, right before mud struck. We'll have to look back what that was, when exactly that took place. But that's it. We managed to pull off this grand encirclement. So now we have two pockets again, a larger one and a smaller one. The Soviets have already built up forces right to the north of Tambov. A thin line, but still formations are trickling in. We cannot destroy them fast enough that they produce more. We're going to have to get ahead of that curve. As the operation developed, we didn't need to commit the 2nd SS Panzer Corps or the 57th Panzer Corps, which is fantastic. These strong panzer divisions have not even taken part in any of the fighting, so they are fresh, resting, refitting for the next phase of the spring-summer offensive, which is now dead center mass in the summertime. That is going to be advantageous for the Germans for future ops, thinking about other operations right within this region. Now we do have our center Panzer Corps grouping, our northern Panzer Corps grouping, and our southern Panzer Corps grouping similarly geographically arrayed as we did when we started out the 1943 spring-summer offensive. Now we don't want to overcommit having Army Group South's Panzer Corps too far north. What we did is we stopped here. The Slovakian Mobile Division is the farthest mobile formation from this Panzer Corps grouping and Infantry Corps grouping. We don't want to take them too far out of position for future operations, which might involve some encirclement potential further to the south. Which is a segue to really asking, what do the Germans do from here? Primary operation next is to destroy the Soviets, which is not going to be a trivial matter. And that's going to take a concerted effort of our own forces to destroy the Soviets. Future operations are going to be on hold for the next 2 to 3 weeks as we clean all of this up and get back into position for the next stages of 1943. The Infantry Corps we talked about is right here now. We railed it in right to the west of Tula. Strong Infantry Corps, and also a handful of single infantry divisions that we extracted from other places along our front to place into more critical positions, and here are 2 of them, and I believe there was another one here that we already reassigned to Corps headquarters, and we also brought one up from this Infantry Corps down to the south, which we had pulled out of Army Group South's front, where they really weren't needed as far as establishing a defensive line. And there are no Panzer Corps really south of the Panzer grouping here. No Panzer divisions, mobile divisions whatsoever. We have to think about that. Are we going to conduct offensive operations south of this point? And more than likely we will. The 3rd, the 36th, the 37th, and 39th are all within this grouping. And at least 2 to 3 panzer divisions I'm feeling are going to have to go south and combine and work in conjunction and maybe get this encirclement. This could be another stage in the 1943 offensive. Here is the infantry corps we just talked about. I railed up at least 1 or 2 out of this infantry corps, which is the rest are still going to go north. And we also moved overland the 54th to move in and around this sector, maybe as starting the cadre of an attacking group for future operations as well. And that covers the situation report for turn 108, second week of July. We're ready for next turn. Is there anything else to point out? Let's look at losses real quick. Info screens. Lighter losses for the Germans. Most of that was just took place during the initial breach. There was very little fighting once past the Soviets' main line of resistance. The Soviets didn't have very much defense in depth to speak of. And likewise, we didn't encircle and destroy any Soviets. Well, maybe we did. I think there was one isolated hex where we destroyed, I think, 2 formations. We can look real quick, but light Soviet losses here, really, when you talk about it. I think this comes from a mechanized corps that was destroyed this turn. Did we destroy any this turn? 8. How did we destroy 8? We destroyed 8 this turn? Oh, yeah, the Tula Pocket Part 2, I think we destroyed 1 or 2 divisions that weren't very well dug in, and also there was that isolated hex as well. So some losses here, some surrenders here. Men captured 32,000, men killed, so 67,000. Fairly decent, and considerable tank forces, 320. Let's get on to next turn. We may have 2 turns in this episode, mostly because the next week is going to be a lot of cleanup and rearranging our forces along the front, destroying Soviets, and that's going to be a fairly quick situation report for the next turn. So we'll go through the Soviets' turn here and see how they react. No threat really from the east coming west. South of Tambov, the Soviets have some decent forces here, but we've set up a nice, strong frontage where they're not going to be able to break in at all. Otherwise, don't expect the Soviets to do any other shenanigans. Some gaps in our line here and there, and they may stick some of their own forces through. Other than that, it should be a relatively quiet Soviet turn. Famous last words spoken. Here we go. I was going to put some of the moves on camera during the encirclement process. It wasn't that really dramatic. We were talking about maybe we're out of position and maybe waiting a week, but it didn't turn out that way at all. We actually only committed half of the Panzer Corps to the north and half of the Panzer Corps to the south for each respective axis of advance. And all the territorial of the distance is fairly great. We had a lot of mobile formations to make it link up fairly easily. Alright, spared you a whole lot of bombing runs, and there were no Soviet attacks really to speak of. German losses, 10,000, I'll take that. Soviet losses, no attacks. Let's see what they are up to, and let's look at weather. It's always a concern. Excellent, clear weather, all 3 Soviet zones. What did the Soviets do? We have to address the elephant in the room at one point, Moscow. We still have considerable Soviet forces to destroy. The Soviet field army is still there. It still remains fairly strong, a high troop count, dozens and dozens of formations, so operations may turn south where there is opportunity for the Germans. That means extracting a number of our Panzer Corps from this grouping and moving them south. That could, logistically, that puts a delay of 1 to 2 weeks for future operations and planning considerations, but that is something we may want to think about. Really, the entirety of German combat power is within this region right here, from Tula to a little south of Voronezh. We want to take care of some of this part of the front. When we look at it, Tambov, we will have Tambov, and it's kind of a straight line all the way down to Rostov. We'd like a straight front. Because the front has enough turns and bends as we come south of Moscow all the way up to Leningrad, we want to straighten out as much as we can. And that would be Tambov, really. Where is Tambov? Here, and then bend a little bit to Moscow. Ryazan we will take, so it would be Tambov, Ryazan, and then wherever we start to achieve frontage in front of Moscow. What did the Soviets do? Did they already build a front across like a 180-mile rip in their front, and they've already started to throw in some forces? Where did they come from? I do not know. Here they are. They did have a grouping around Tambov, some operational reserves, and now we're seeing them starting to patch another rupture in their front. Not a rupture, but a gaping 180-mile fracture in their front. So it's starting to pull back. They're going to group up, and now we have to start pocket cleanup this turn. So yeah, we'll get another turn in on this episode. It will be relatively brief, since attacks won't really be conducted anywhere along the front, except to clean up the pocket and maybe adjust the lines a little bit and do some shaping ops in preparations for the next phases. We'll do some aerial recon. Obviously, there are a lot more Soviets than we can see right now. Any shenanigans? No. And no. And no. All right. I'll be back. We'll do some more moves and attacks, and then we'll see what the Soviets have to say about the next stages of our offensive. All right, I'm back. Moves and attacks complete. No change. Army Group North. Let's move south and eastwards and down. No change along the Moscow sector as well. We did insert the 26th Infantry Corps. Now is in line, and we're starting to group up in this region where we plan to break out east and north, and then here in the Tambov region, north and east, and potentially encircle these forces here. That could be the next operation that is conducted. A lot of cleanup, a lot of trying to destroy the Soviets in the Tula Pocket Part 2, and also the Voronezh Pocket. Let's cover that in a little more detail. Let's take a quick look at losses. Germans under 20,000. There were several attacks within both pockets. Soviets up to 233,000 losses, 600 AFVs. And just look at all the men that surrendered. It was tough going, especially in the northern pocket, the Tula Pocket Part 2. Still, Soviets remain. They would not be budged from this location. Efremov is holding out. We decided to commit Panzer Corps to the effort of pocket cleanup. Otherwise, it was going to take too long and be too arduous, and too much loss of men and material within our infantry divisions. So we committed some panzer divisions. They didn't have any tasks for this week other than pocket cleanup. We kept the 2nd SS Panzer Corps and the 57th Panzer Corps out of any fighting. They are refitting right now Likewise, we did that with the 30th and the 24th Panzer Corps. Here, down south, in and around Litebsk and Tambov. Here's the 24th and the 30th. So 4 Panzer Corps were not in action. They are resting and refitting and just slightly getting into position for future operations. Go back to the losses. So that's pretty decent. That all of the attacks are now complete, and this is what we managed to achieve. I did a quick count in Voronezh. We did destroy several of their formations within this pocket. I did a troop count, and it was close to 60 formations within this pocket, not counting Army headquarters that are within this, or Army and Corps headquarters that are in this pocket. 5th Army for one. I think we scattered another. Not a bad haul for the Germans in this pocket at all. There's a lot of Soviet formations remaining in the Voronezh pocket, so the losses will be even greater. I'm guessing in the next turn or two, once we finish off all the Soviets within these pockets, it's going to eclipse 500,000 men and close to maybe 1,000 tanks. Very sizable losses inflicted on the Soviets. We also started to move our forces for what's next. One of the priorities was to get a defensive line established and remove our Panzer Corps out of the line and get them freedom of maneuver for future operations. We have a pretty solid line here. The Soviets already have a contiguous front, even though twice now, within the span of 2 months, we have ripped open a 150-mile wide gap in their front, and still they are able to patch it up twice in a row. Maybe 3 times is a charm. Looking a little closer, we can see the Panzer Corps here that we committed to pocket cleanup. Likewise, the furthest grouping of our Panzer Corps, we have pulled out the 37th Panzer Corps as well as the 36th and 37th. There's a lot of Panzer Corps in the 30s. So the 37th and the 36th are now out of this concentration. They are going to start to form an attacking group here in conjunction with shaping ops now to get to the north bank of the Don, push right to the north of Bogachar, get a bridgehead over the Don to the south with intention of encircling the Soviets here. So that's for future operations as well. More than likely it won't happen at least for another 2 weeks, as we have to get the rest of our troops that are destroying the Soviets in the pocket back into position for future operations. If we look further south, no change along the Rostov sector, Voroshilovgrad to Rostov sector. No change at all. And the Romanians are gaining some ground. It's odd what the Soviets are doing here. They show that they have a number of formations in here, and now they're only showing 4. And they've taken ground, they've given ground. There's been no fighting. The Romanians aren't going to dent the Soviets here. However, it's just a stalemate, and that's fine. It's protecting the flank, freeing up German formations to go about their business. Also point out in this region, those 2 infantry corps that we pulled out in and around Rostov have now made it to the front. They are going to take part in the build-up here, assembling our forces for this encirclement. During this turn, there was also a lot of administrative moves. 374, we brought down the 4th Panzer Army and assigned it to Army Group Center up here to take some of the stress off. 3rd Panzer Army, which was attached to Army Group Center and all these Panzer Corps in operation. So now we have two Panzer armies supporting Army Group Center's operations. Since there was no Panzer Corps whatsoever in Army Group North, there was no point in having 4th Panzer Army up there. And a host of reassignments and striving to get everyone in command and control as best as possible while having dual purposes of destroying the pocket and getting into position for future attacks and establishing a perimeter. So a lot went on this turn. I believe we're ready for next turn at this point. Let's zoom in and check out what the Soviets will do during their turn. Last turn, they did not conduct a single attack, which is surprising. All right, once again, I spared you all from a whole bunch of bombing runs. There were no Soviet attacks to speak of. Let's look at losses. Germans well under 20,000. This is troubling, though, looking at or close to 3 million losses. That's far too much, in my opinion. The Soviets, however, have eclipsed 12 million losses, and that's great. We want to make that climb even greater, hopefully getting around 12,500,000 once we finish off the Voronezh pocket. And tank losses as well. The Soviets, 45,765. We want 50,000. Let's get to 50,000. Can we do it? I believe we can. However, there are far less Soviet tank formations on the map in their order of battle because we've destroyed so many of them. However, that's a good segue to check out what's going on in the front. Clear, clear, clear. That is music to my ears. And let's take a look at the pockets. Well, let's take a quick journey from Army Group North-South. Doesn't look like any shenanigans are happening here. Not pushing any of their forces through gaps in our line. Surprisingly, the Soviets are not challenging this bridgehead, which is fairly lightly defended, and they only have a scant force facing off against these two infantry divisions. This could be a compelling reason to start building up here again in the future. And we did make some attacks. I forgot to mention that. We attacked, pushing the Soviets back last turn and gaining some ground. We want to push along the Oka River to the north bank, where the Soviets have not built up these tremendous fort values. Let's look just to be sure. There are 2s, there are some 3s up here though as well, and they're not as dense of a defensive line in this region, the south portion of the Moscow front. Looking to gain a little ground here, little mini shaping operation going on, maybe to encircle some of these Soviet forces. Soviet forces look a little light because we don't have aerial recon right now going, showing the full picture of all our intelligence on Soviet positions. There's a lot more Soviets than there are now. Let's just do it and see what it looks like. So it's filled in quite substantially in the operational reserves back here on Moscow, and here still filtering in south of the Oka, potentially to defend Ryazan, but more than likely the southern flank of any approaches to Moscow. Let's zoom in here. What else has happened? Starting to build up a defensive line, the Soviets are, but I would like them to push as many of their forces. That's right, the segue. I noticed this splash across the screen during their turn. They have conveniently, added more of their forces to the Tula pocket. Well, thank you for that. I don't know why they're doing this. It's certainly not a relief attempt. That is very far-fetched. If they were thinking that, we'll just, again, seal off More Soviet formations. I don't know how many we can tally up of Soviet formations we've destroyed this way. It's significant. Just careless and, you know, no reason for doing this whatsoever. Maybe they'll change that behavior in War in the East 2. It's kind of a segue. I've been avoiding talking about War in the East 2. I did purchase it, and it's installed, and I've looked through it. Quite amazing. One thing I did note, just going through the first scenario, the tutorial scenario, is that neither side's forces appear to be rendered on the map during the execution of the turn. I do believe we did see some of the attacks, but like when we watch the Soviets turn, we can get a lot of intel looking far into the Soviets' rear areas where they're building up their reserves. So we should not see that during their turn, and I think they've done away with that and gotten that out of the new engine. Anyways, 3 more Soviet formations will be destroyed, forced to surrender, and more tanks off out of their order of battle. Again, I can't tell because our detection level is low here, but during their turn, I did see that it was a tank corps here, along with 2 mechanized corps and a tank corps will be destroyed. Anyway, no change here with the Soviets. We have a contiguous front, so they're not leaking out of the pocket, and no encroachment coming east to west here. Looking good. Soviets did build up some forces blocking us from getting an easy bridgehead, but we did push over the 10th Panzer Grenadier Division, and it was not challenged. Therefore, we should be able to get a bridgehead over here for future ops. Don't want to spook the Soviets, though. Let them rush in as many of their forces as they want into this salient. Let's get some aerial recon here as well. Not that impressive. Nonetheless, it will straighten our front if we do encircle these Soviets, which I am planning on doing. Continue to build up here if we can extract any more of our forces out of the line without jeopardizing any portion of our front. And once this is cleaned up, we can commit some more forces here. Next turn, 3rd week of July, will be all about cleanup as well and getting back into position to continue the attack. Looks like that's about it. We don't want to be premature attacking in this region as well because we want to encircle the Soviets here, if possible, breaking out of Tambov. We will do some shaping ops just to get north and east of Tambov, maybe even take it. That could be a good jumping off point. That could be the task in the next week or two for the forces that are concentrated here that are not committed to pocket cleanup. And we'll continue to work. Oh yeah, this is another group that overextended itself, so we'll destroy these Soviets. And now the previously assigned Panzer Corps that was with Army Group North is now with Army Group Center, and it will work in tandem with the forces we have available here to start gaining some ground east along this area. It will be very hard to encircle the Soviets here because we'd be going up against into the meat of the Soviets' main line of resistance and the bulk of their forces defending Moscow. Nonetheless, this has to be cleaned up as well. Big picture still looks the same. All this brown and red will be gone, as will that. Hopefully this turn, we have enough combat power to do so, and then move everything back into position for future ops. And that is about it. We'll end the video here. I hope you enjoyed watching. This is First Fire and Non-Assault Move Out.